Hi, everybody. Hello, welcome. My name is Meredith Gershenson. I am a research analyst here at workforce.com. And today, as the title suggests, we're going to talk a little bit about how to manage burnout of younger employees specifically. Today, I am joined by a very special guest, Moe Carrick. Moe, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Meredith. So happy to be here. Great topic.
Awesome. Yeah, this is going to be, we're going to go everywhere with this one. Moe is an author and leadership coach at Momentum Inc. with over 30 years of work in organizations on issues of partnership, leadership, inclusion, strategy, and culture. Moe believes that rigorous self-awareness, courage, honest dialogue, active involvement, and empathy are fundamentals to building full partnerships based on trust and curiosity. Moe is a founder of Momentum and holds a master's degree in OD as a certified daring way/dare to lead facilitator, a coach, and is the author of 2 best-selling books, FIT Matters, How to Love Your Job, and Brave Space Workplace, Make Your Company Fit for Human Life. That is probably one of the better resumes I have read on here, Moe. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Meredith. It's always awkward to hear your own resume read. You're like, wow, that's
You're
true.
just like,
30 years.
great.
That's a long time.
You're like, wow, I accomplished so much. I need to take
Who
a
is that
break.
person she's talking about? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. To give everyone a super quick run through of our webinar platform here for those who have not joined us in the past. On the right side, we have our chat box. There you can throw in any questions you have. To get everyone well acquainted, I love for you just to type in where you're dialing in from. Today, I'm coming in from Chicago, where for those who have come in the past know I love to give my little weather report. It is a nice 60 degrees or so. Hopefully it'll warm up later today, but very much a spring day in Chicago. So yeah, feel free to throw in any questions you have there. It's awesome to see you all coming in. Robert, as always, it's good to see your name. Awesome. Oh my God, this is so great. Thank you guys for coming. Great. So yeah, feel free to throw in any questions you have there. We will get them around to them at the very end. I will tag them. We'll have an open Q&A with Moe to answer all your burning questions. And we also have a couple poll questions throughout the webinar itself. Those will just slide up right on the bottom left of your screen. We love to be able to interact with you all, kind of get a sense of where your head is at. And in terms of our handout, our little goodie bag of today, we actually have 3 awesome handouts that Moe has provided us. One is on the top 10 behaviors for teaming. Another is what questions to ask staff to get to the root of their feelings. And the third one is a shelter model mindset info sheet. So all amazing handouts. Really recommend checking them out. They're super actionable. Yeah. And then in terms of SHRM and HRCI PDC credits, if you are trying to get recertified in either of those and you're watching this live, I will happily share those at the very end and just shout those out. So I'll be sure to shout them out twice. If you have any questions on them, feel free to email them over to me. And then finally, to give a little background on workforce.com, we are an HCM software that specializes for businesses with hourly staff. We run these webinar series really just to present our learnings and data from our own clients. Awesome. So Moe, to get things kicked off, first and foremost, I would love for you to tell me about some of the work you do and specifically some of the clients that you work with.
Yeah, thanks, Meredith. Thanks for setting the stage so much. So the work that I do, it falls in, I would say, 2 main areas. One is in the realm of programs that we offer, both open enrollment and programs that we offer to clients, and then what we call on-demand coaching and consulting. So the areas of specialty that we really love to dig into with clients, large and small, is absolutely how they can activate the talents of their people for success. So, my mantra, you've heard me say it, I'm sure, Meredith, in our work getting ready for this webinar, is that people make organizations great. And yet people are complex. We have issues and we bring them right into work. And we are not machines, which makes us infinitely more interesting,
Right.
but also a bit more complex. So we're focusing usually on three main levers for activating the talents of people. One is, of course, people-centered leadership. The second is a conscious, brave culture. Culture really drives everything in an organization. And then lastly is teams who care. We know that when we feel part of a team, when we have that brave space where we can show up fully, we are able to bring more of our talents to work. So those are the three areas that my team and I mostly support through both education, we have training programs, through coaching, and through strategic consulting. Some of our clients, we've worked the full gamut. It's been one of the interesting things for me about the firm and about my history in this work, which is that I've never ended up focusing on one particular niche. So we do work a lot with small privately held companies, I would say under 1,000 employees, potentially, and even smaller ones than that, with 50 employees who are scaling or growing. But we've also worked with the mega companies, the big ones, so we've got a lot of really wonderful names on our resume. We've worked with Google, we've worked with AWS, we've worked with Starbucks, we've worked with smaller companies like Structus 3D or Hydro Flask, which is a brand that many people know. And then we work a lot as well in the healthcare and education sector. We've worked with restaurant chains, we've worked with retail stores, we've worked with healthcare systems, education school districts, as well as individual schools, and then a lot of privately held businesses that are either selling a product or selling a service. We work with agencies, nonprofit agencies such as Caring Bridge or the American Red Cross. So it's a pretty wide breadth of industries. And I think one of the reasons for that is that everybody, whatever kind of company you have, has to deal with people issues in your business. And so it's sort of a, non-denominational focus. Everybody thinks their issues are unique, and they are. I mean, every industry has its own characteristics, but really the fundamentals of people leadership and culture creation are consistent across all sectors, in my experience.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you talked, as you said, how you covered the gamut when it comes to size, when it comes to topics, specifically more or less pertaining a lot to culture, right? So my question for you is, what are some trends within hourly wage industries, shift-based workforces that you've noticed within the mental health space?
Yeah, you mean the mental health impact on the workers, not so much companies in mental health, right? Yeah, it's not that great out there, right? I mean, there's some, I would call them meta trends, and then there's kind of micro trends. So the meta trends that we're seeing are definitely the malaise that is hitting us as a mental health crisis, really, and its own pandemic, if you will, globally post COVID-19. Although I would say that we were entering into that mental health pandemic prior to COVID-19. So I'm not convinced 100% that they're, exclusively connected.
Right.
But we do have an uptick in mental health concerns and issues showing up in the workplace that is of epidemic proportion right now, and of course in society at large. In particular, with the populations that you're talking about around hourly wage industries, we see an even more intense impact in those spaces. In COVID-19, many hourly wage people were frontline staff, not all, but many. And so they experienced a lot of challenges as we coped with the global pandemic, including disrupted consistency of work. So like, come to work today, don't come to work today, as people's hours were needing to change, as client needs were shifting. We also saw employers experience what many call the Great Resignation, which is when 14 million people opted to leave the workforce, causing them to really have to change, in many cases, the wages that they're offering, as well as the structures. We've seen lots of retail and food and beverage organizations who have had to close their doors or shift their hours of operation in order to even get the talent that they need. So the employers have been struggling, which I think then creates higher stress for the workers who are coming into a situation where things are very busy. They're experiencing high volumes of staff that they need to serve. They may have people calling out sick or not have enough staff to cover their shift. So they're doing double duty, which increases stress, which increases burnout. And then you add that many of these jobs are at the lower wage category, either minimum wage or, just above minimum wage, where many young workers are having to have more than one job
Right.
to make ends meet, which becomes really untenable when you think about quality of life, and how we juggle those jobs. So, we have seen some wage uptick as employers have tried to respond with wages that help people to support themselves, but we're certainly not there yet in many industries. So I think there's a huge impact. The last thing I'll say is that some of what I'm seeing is that the mental health conditions affecting young people are consistent across all job categories. So we have kind of anxiety and depression in particular that are really rampant in young people. And there's other theories about why that is, including that social media is not helping, including that climate change and other meta forces are creating hopelessness in young people who are struggling to find their place in the world or to have optimism about a future that they can be excited about. So those trends impact how people are showing up at work as well.
It's everything you just said. I want to go in like a million different directions.
Right? I know. We're going to have a script, I'm sure.
Oh my God. I mean, no, it's so true, especially looking into younger cohorts that are really struggling with a lot of the anxiety, depression, and, are getting diagnosed with ADD, ADHD on an all-time high. And it's interesting to see. And I asked a poll question to the audience, and just to shout that out really quickly, I asked, how concerned are you about burnout amongst your younger staff in your organization? And the majority of the audience is saying pretty concerned. We've got some people that are incredibly concerned, some people that are not very. No one is not at all concerned. And I'm happy to see that, because you're in the right place for this webinar. Is that something that you're seeing reflective within these organizational leaders who are kind of starting to get the sense that, okay, maybe we should look into this a little bit more?
Yes, definitely. Although being aware that they need to look into it and then being capable of looking into it well are sort of two different things.
Yeah.
And I'll mention as well, in case the audience hasn't seen it, that there is a really powerful report that came out from our United States Surgeon General. His name is Dr. Vivek Murthy. I quoted Dr. Murthy in both my books, actually all three, because my third book releases in early June. It's called When Work is Good. And Dr. Murthy and his team did a pretty big longitudinal study about the state. So the report is called the Surgeon General's Report on Workplace Mental Health and Well-being. Or maybe it's well-being and mental health. I'm not sure which order, but they are echoing the trends that we're hearing. And it's a pretty stark picture that they're creating. And they've come up with a 5-part framework, which actually dovetails beautifully to my framework of what we need from work, which has 7 items, but it fits into theirs beautifully. The thing about Dr. Murthy's research that I really appreciated was that they did a good job calling out the intersectionality of impact in the meta environment, meaning that not only do we have issues that are impacting everybody, if you have other identity dimensions, such as people of color, people who identify as transgender, people who identify as lower class or disabled, are disproportionately impacted by these mental health challenges that we're talking about, impacting everybody globally. Okay.
Sorry about that. I am back.
I kept talking. I was like,
my Wi-Fi just cut out completely. I was like, oh no, I'm so sorry about that, Mo.
No, I was just finishing the question. I was talking about the intersectionality of the impacts of mental health on workers that Dr. Murthy recommends in his report, or that he mentioned, which is that, it's not affecting us all the same. Underrepresented groups are being disproportionately impacted by the mental health challenges that we all are being impacted. So that's a long way around to your question, which is, yes, I think the employers that we're working with are definitely seeing and noticing that their workers are, in many cases, not feeling upright and well. They are calling out sick more often. They're not showing up for shifts. Some employers that we work with are really proacting around it. They're really trying to get good in particular, at helping their people leaders to be capable of navigating those very sensitive conversations around what it is that's happening, and then trying to create engagement with people so that they can feel both safe and seen in their workplace. Other employers that I'm seeing, and I'm sure some of our people on the call work for some of these, are really not sure what to do. I've even had leaders say things to me like, it just seems like people are, more sensitive now than they used to be, or what's wrong with people right now that they're
Right.
not able to work hard, and I find myself really frustrated with those comments because it represents a blindness to the realities of what's happening. But I would say for the most part, most employers are noticing and trying to name, and then trying to shore up their own skill sets and their tools for how do they handle this.
Mm. Yeah, that's such a good point. And really quick, I want to point to the chat because I am seeing some questions here. In terms of the handouts, I will pass those out at the very end. So make sure you hang in there for that. And if you can't hang out to the end, I will email them over to you guys who are attending. So no worries there. And I think that's such a good point, Mo. Thank you so much for sharing. I want to quickly point to this first slide that we have here. And I think it really beautifully highlights a lot of those points in that article, in that study that you were talking about. And this is a article from CNBC called Burnout is on the Rise Worldwide, and Gen Z, young millennials and women are the most stressed. And my question for you is here, what are some of the primary reasons why younger employees even leave their jobs to begin with?
There's so many. And I would say that, we're seeing some trends that are really interesting about how people are leaving as well, right? So it's not only that people are leaving like after they've been at a job for a while. People are leaving before they've even started their jobs. They're interviewing and then not coming back for the final interview. They're saying yes to a job, then they're not showing on the first day of work, or they're staying for a very short period of time.
Right.
Some of the things that we're seeing include, this job wasn't what I thought it would be, right? So I got in there and it's not what I want. It's a dirtier job than I wanted. It's more physically taxing than I wanted. Maybe the commute ends up being longer than I intended, or it's just too stressful. One of the common things that we hear, especially in frontline workers, is it's too stressful. I'm working in food services and there's a line out the door and we don't have enough staff. And so there's not enough food. People get angry. People hang up the phone on me. People are rude. It feels dangerous in my work environment. So I think the work environment, the safety that workers feel, as well as the stress are probably the biggest reasons that we're hearing, as well as just the difficulty of making it work in terms of juggling a part-time schedule. So, restaurant workers, for example, oftentimes the shifts are unpredictable. And so if somebody's trying to be in school at the same time or has another job, they can't have their schedule just be made up every week or every 2 weeks, because they can't plan the other things in their life. So it becomes quite difficult to succeed. And maybe they think it's going to be steady when they start their job, and then they get in and they're like, oh, I only get from my boss, I get my schedule every 2 weeks, and that's not enough time for me to manage my classes. And so they end up leaving. And, at the same time, the reasons why people stay are, for me, even more interesting, because this is something that employers can pay attention to. People stay when they feel seen, connected, and valued, even if those other issues are present for them, because they have someone they can talk to about them, right?
Build loyalty.
Yeah, build loyalty, build connection, have some empathy, like, okay, we can work this out together.
Right. Right.
So there are lots of reasons people give for leaving, but it's, in many cases, I think it's more interesting to look at why are people staying. Because that's more directly in the control of the employers themselves and the leaders themselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've had this conversation, a couple of times, and it's been reiterated so many different ways in a lot of these webinars. And I think the idea of including your staff, even frontline staff who are 16 years old, let's say on average, right, which is a very young age to start giving responsibility. But once you start giving responsibility to these staff members, it creates such a sense of deep-rooted loyalty within the company and support for the organization, no matter how small their role is. When they feel like that they have stake in the company, they're going to give that loyalty right back to you.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. I want to go more into understanding youth burnout from,
Mm.
again, kind of its root causes. What are the main causes of burnout for younger hourly staff, and how does that differ from older employees?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'm probably not as deeply immersed in that as even you are,
Mhm.
Meredith. So I'd love to know more about sort of what you're seeing. But I think that the causes of burnout, we don't expect burnout in younger workers as much as we do in older workers, right? Because there's a tendency to think, well, you've been doing this job for a really long time and you've hit, the levels of burnout that are causing stress. But right now we're seeing burnout happen fast and furiously. So the what I'm seeing in young people are that they are they're feeling burned out because they're overwhelmed by the job, or they don't feel connected to the other staff that they're working with. So there's so burnout is directly connected to, am I feeling mentally healthy right now? Do I have the support I need, for example, to do the hard thing? And if I've been in COVID isolation, or my friendships have slowed down or deteriorated, or I'm spending too much time online, I'm not going to be that connected outside of work as well. So then if I come to work and I don't feel connected, maybe the workers are all older than me, maybe they speak a different language than I do, I'm not even feeling connected there. We do fill a lot of our connection needs with work. If we're working full time, we spend more time there than we do anywhere else. So I
Mhm.
think younger workers are falling victim to that as well, which is just a lack of social connection
Yeah.
in the workplace. And then I think the intensity of the work environment. One of my kids works in food services. They're 22, and they talk frequently about just the stress of the work itself, mainly. And I'm seeing some comments in the chat, that there's a lot of people calling in, and
Mhm.
so the shifts are shorthanded, and that creates stress. Again, as you mentioned, Meredith, these workers are often new to the workforce.
Yeah.
My kid that I mentioned is 22, but if you're 18, you don't have a lot of experience, with hardship, with
Right.
difficulty juggling multiple things, because you're just entering the world. So I think that's another dynamic, is that younger workers are being asked to navigate dynamics and stressors that actually they aren't really prepared to navigate, at this time. They haven't had the life experience and the variety of jobs. And some of that is because younger workers are maybe trying to support themselves fully, rather than, we're not talking about workers that are just taking summer jobs in between college. We're talking about
Mhm.
full-time workers who are trying to make ends meet for
Sure.
themselves with this.
It's such a good point that you're making. And a lot of these younger employees, this is their first job, possibly. And I mean, I still remember the stress of working a full day's work, a full 8-hour shift. Right
Hmm.
out the gate, I was exhausted as like, I think I was like 14 or 15. I was so tired at the end of the day
Yes.
because it was just like, it was draining, and I don't think I realized, like, how long a workday feels, especially compared to a school day, right?
Yes.
Where you're changing locations, right? And, like, you're switching it up, and you have, like, the social aspect of it, whereas work is work, and it was really jarring to have that first week. I remember it so clearly. I was so exhausted.
Well, totally. And you're on
Yeah.
your feet, maybe you haven't been in,
Yes.
it's interesting because a lot of older workers will say things to me. And obviously, those watching know that I'm an older worker, right? I'm 61 years old and I've worked since I was 14.
Mhm.
But I am aware that older workers today tend to have, I think, judgments sometimes that younger workers aren't resilient.
Mm.
They're not, like, they can't take it. They can't take, the jobs that we took when we were younger,
Yeah.
which I don't think is really relevant because the whole world has changed. The whole world has changed. And so I think younger work, well, and backing up, there is also sort of a trend that I see and I talk with in my education sector clients, which is that there is a generational dynamic of learning resilience. Younger generations maybe having been overprotected
Mm-hmm.
by their parents or by their school system,
Yeah.
so that they actually haven't developed the kind of grit that they actually need in the working world. So they come into the working world and they're being challenged to develop it at that time.
Yeah.
But it's a process, right? It's a process, especially coming out of COVID-19, where people were in isolation, were alone, were not necessarily very engaged in school or in work, that they're perhaps a bit less. That because of ongoing stressors, they're less capable of being resilient. The last thing I would say is younger workers often don't find the mentorship and support they need. So, you're talking about how exhausting it was for you. And I find myself thinking, and I wonder who your frontline manager was, right? Because there's tremendous pressure on frontline managers who are, in many cases, are also very young,
Yeah.
who haven't had any leadership training.
Right.
And so that person doesn't know how to talk to you about the stressor you're feeling when you're tired, how to help you remember the big picture, have an optimistic view that this will get better as you learn some of that mentoring and coaching that's so important to any of us when we're growing in our capacity at work. And I think we often lack the leadership skill in workplaces to cultivate that kind of resilience in the workers themselves.
For sure. That's such a good point. I want to look into the second slide that we have here on some of these BLS labor force statistics that we pulled. And you can kind of see it's a bit of a hodgepodge, but trying to break it down based off some of the more popular industries, especially those that can relate here. Robert, shout out to you. Retail industry. We see retail here, average age is 38. So my question for you, Mo, is how might burnout look different from industry to industry? If we're talking healthcare, where the average age, as we can see, is 53, and restaurants is more 23 years old.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this and getting grounded in it. Definitely. I think there are some sectors that have been much more intensely hit
Mm-hmm.
by the stressors of the global pandemic and the recovery from the global pandemic, for sure. What's interesting is even with the age differences, like in healthcare, we know that healthcare is one of the worst hit from a burnout perspective. We have a tremendous amount of providers and frontline staff that are leaving healthcare because of unprecedented levels of burnout. But that's not, looking at this chart, that's not necessarily where your younger workers are. So when we look at where the younger workers are, we're definitely seeing these uptick in numbers in wholesale and retail, trade, in retail trade overall, in leisure and hospitality, and less so in manufacturing. So those are also mostly the customer facing jobs.
Yep.
And there's a concurrent trend, I think, that these labor force statistics doesn't really show, which is that customers have gotten more difficult. Have you noticed that, Meredith?
Yes.
Yeah, like people
Expectations. I mean, yeah.
expectations, judgments, people having, like, they want what they want when they want it. There's been, we've had in our somewhat binary political environment of recent years, we have sort of the lid coming off around bullying behaviors, people being rude, and many of these younger workers who are at the front line, they're serving someone food, cleaning someone's room, helping somebody, in an airport to find a parking place or whatever. They're dealing with people that are being extremely difficult, high
Yeah.
intensity, high conflict, which really does contribute to burnout as well. So we have to factor in that the frontline nature of where young people are able to find the jobs that they're finding, and how stressful that is as well.
Yep. Yeah. Everyone's expecting that Chick-fil-A level of service, as I like to say.
Right.
Or
Well,
there's people chasing down other cars in the drive-through and making sure that they have everything that they could ever want. Yeah.
right, exactly. Well, it's interesting. I like to frequent Starbucks because
Yep.
the coffee's always the same, and I can go there. They have good internet, and sometimes when I'm writing and doing things, it's really helpful. I like the white noise. I like to sit there. So I have a
Totally. Yeah.
local Starbucks that I go to,
Mhm.
and during the last few years, I've noticed them frequently having a sign on their door. We're hiring, and there's 4 or 5 workers that I see often. They've been there kind of throughout. They are mostly younger workers, and I've chatted with them a little bit about what their experience has been. And one of the things that they have said is that the revolving door of staff is one of the stressors that they find is very high as well. because they know their jobs. They've stuck it out. There's something about the job that they're liking. And in this case, I think in this particular Starbucks, I actually think they have a pretty good people manager running the store, at least based on what they say. But when they have to reintegrate to a new teammate every few days or every few weeks, and somebody doesn't show up for their shift, that creates a real tension because we don't have that team care, that feeling of team care. And I mentioned this because recently I was in there and things seemed better. Like everybody seemed a little calmer. So I talked to one of my people. I was like, hey, how's it going here? And he said, oh, it's so great. Our team has been consistent now for 2 weeks and we're really getting along well. Like I could see the vibe of that. And so I think that that's another dynamic, which again, employers can impact, is like, are we giving our teams a way to build relationships with one another to create that feeling of positivity and support.
Totally. Such a good point and great case study example for sure.
Yeah.
What are some signs and symptoms of burnout that younger workers might experience, and how can managers support them?
Yeah, signs and symptoms of burnout. So there's so many of them, but some of the typical things that we see are not wanting to go to work, right? Like really waking up and being like, I got a shift and I don't want to
today.
Right, not today. Or like what sometimes people call the Sunday scaries, which of course can happen on any day. It depends on when your shifts start, but that anxiety feeling, that's a strong indication of burnout. Being unreasonably tired, having trouble feeling energy, which can also be, of course, depression or anxiety, but it can be a sign of burnout. Feeling like you're not yourself, snapping at people, being more impatient than usual, noticing problem behaviors, in particular, numbing behaviors like over drinking, over drugging, overeating, over Netflix binging, those kinds of things are often indicators that say, hey, you're burned out. You're not actually at your best. You're not really thriving. So I think those are a couple. I think how managers can support them is such a good question. And it's such a complex one to answer in a lot of ways. But here's my simple thing. The way managers can support burnout is by having relationships with employees that matter, having connected, supported relationships, which means building trust with each employee who probably has a different need around how they build trust, which usually requires of managers the capacity to be both vulnerable and also brave. So vulnerability isn't so much about oversharing. It's about being willing to step into uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure and stay centered on being brave. So an example would be if I'm noticing that an employee is appearing burned out, as a people leader, do I have the relationship with that person to A, notice any changes in their behavior, B, to validate, to get curious about how are they doing, and to know how to ask about it in a way that's appropriate, and then to be able to show real empathy for that person's feelings of burnout so that that person can discover some solutions to their burn. Because I think one of the things that managers sometimes have a misconception about is it's their job to fix the burnout. Right? Like, oh, you're feeling burned out. Let me make this better. Let me drop a shift for you. And I would really encourage managers to stay away from that because burnout, if I'm burned out, I own it. My manager can help me though, but I've got to be able to be proactive in thinking through what am I going to do about my well-being and how can my employer, my manager in particular, maybe help me navigate that. And it might mean, it would be good if I had less shifts or maybe oftentimes for burnout, I just need to be seen. I need someone to validate, it's been hard these last few weeks or months and let's make it better together. And here's what we're doing in the future.
That's such a good point. And Susie in the chat said the revolving door effect is huge on morale for workers. That's so true. I mean, I forgot what the animal's called, but it's the one that when one jumps off the cliff, the rest of them follow. Yes, lemmings, exactly. That is to a T on, especially for younger employees where, there is a social aspect within shift-based workers that you see and there's friendships formed. And I think that's amazing. That really actually helps the loyalty aspect that we were talking about earlier. But if one of those people, one of those friend members of the group quits, the rest are going to follow suit. And I think,
Yes.
Susie, that's such a good point, because it feels like, you're kind of just pulling like something where it just is like never ending for HR, where there's nothing left for them there and you don't know what to do and you know where to go with it. And Mo, I love your point and taking the weight off a little bit on managers and HR and realizing this is very much like sometimes a natural progression of things where people just burn out. And sometimes you need to know when to let go and when to realize, okay, this is where I can actually prevent it before it happens. This is where I can actually step in and say, hey, I've been noticing a couple things, and this is actually a really good example for something in one of your handouts, and talking about recognizing those feelings, how to ask these questions, and how to pull them aside before it becomes kind of something that's too late. I hate to say, but it's an unfortunate circumstance most of the time.
No, you're so right. And you're especially right, Meredith, with this idea that there is a too late with burnout, like especially with a certain job. So I sometimes think of it as like there's a point when you're past the decision.
Yes.
Like I'm leaving this job. And employers and managers, I think, benefit strongly from noticing the symptoms of burnout way before that. And what you want to do, of course, is create engagement as an antidote to burnout. Burnout is fixable when it's early.
Yeah.
When it's early. It also really helps a lot if the employer has some resources that they can offer to the employee, or at least point the employee towards for mental health support, because it's hard to discern, is this burnout or is this a mental health issue? And, most managers and even business owners aren't qualified to diagnose the difference. We're not therapists. We don't know. And that person may not know themselves either. They may be, I'm not sure, am I burned out or am I suffering from anxiety? And so having some ways that you can offer some help with your employee assistance program, with local resources, with talking to colleagues around how else are you coping, and even other things we know contribute to general well-being, like supporting employees to get enough sleep, to practice meditation, to get exercise, talking in your workplace about the things that we know are good self-care. One of the handouts we have is called the shelter model, which looks at our model for self-care. I think employers can help employees resist burnout by really emphasizing, you need to take care of yourself and we're going to help you. Like, we have these ways of helping you take care of yourself, rather than what I think employees often do is they sort of put their head in the sand about, yes, I'm going to ask you to work 8 days in a row, 8 hours a day, because that's what we need, as opposed to recognizing, hang on a second, that's not good for somebody. That's not good for anybody.
No, at the end of the day, definitely not.
Yeah.
Tiffany, it's so funny that you mentioned this in the chat. Tiffany said implementing an EAP program has helped loads with this. We actually had a webinar, I believe it was back in, I want to say November of last year. And we had on Laura Timbrook. She is great on the mental health front, and she talks a lot about EAP programs. I really recommend checking that out. But Tiffany, great minds think alike. I was just about to say that EAP programs I've heard really awesome success with, for sure.
Yes, good.
Awesome. I want to point quickly to this slide, and Mo, to kind of reiterate the question, I want to hear some specific examples, some specific strategies that employers can use to help support their younger employees, whether it's more frequent breaks, which we kind of touched on, whether it's knowing when to even stop and say, I gotta let you go, like this isn't working anymore, kind of thing. I would love some specific examples and just some protocols.
Absolutely. And I love what you have on the screen here. So I especially love that first piece about giving young employees structure is key, right? I would agree. Structure and clarity, right? So clarity means like, make sure that you're clear. What is the role? What are the hours of the role? What are the job duties that are expected? What does good look like, right? Most of us come to work every day wanting to do a good job. Most of us also don't get enough feedback about how we're doing at that job. So I think one of the things that managers and employers, can do a better job of is giving more regular feedback. And I don't just mean critical feedback, I mean appreciative feedback.
Yes.
We are very responsive when somebody notices what we did that worked well, because we make a mental note unconsciously, like, I'm going to do more of that. We're a little bit like Pavlov's dogs, right? If I,
Yeah.
if you say to me, Meredith, after this webinar, Mo, that was so great. I love that you did these three things and that you had
Mhm.
these three examples. In my mind, I'm not even going to consciously think about it, but I'm going to be like, cool. Next time I do a webinar with Meredith or with anyone, I'm
Yeah.
going to do those things because she appreciated it and she said that it worked well for their audience. And as opposed to if you say to me, Mo, hey, that webinar didn't kick it. There were 4 things that I thought you did that didn't work at all, and I wanted to let you know. Now I'm a little bit in a spiral of like, uh-oh, I didn't do that well. The webinar's over. I don't know if I'll
Right.
work with Meredith again. And so it may be helpful to me, but probably less helpful than that positive acknowledgement of the behavior that you would want me to repeat.
Mm.
I think one of the things in frontline workers and in young employees that we see chronically is that they just don't get the feedback that they need. Feedback is support,
Yep.
right? So when that employee is starting a new job and they are on time at work 5 days in a row, like notice that. Like, thank you so much for coming to shift every time. Like it really helps us all do a good job at work. That's going to lay down a pathway. So I feel like a simple thing that most employers are not doing a very good job of is having and expecting their people leaders to have regular one-on-one
Mm.
meetups with employees about how things are going. We talk a lot at our firm about how performance reviews, like annual reviews, are a thing of the past. They don't work. Annual reviews and rating and ranking systems don't work. They don't motivate people to make improvement. So you might ask, like, what does work? What does work is regular, caring, and compassionate two-way conversations about how things are going,
Okay.
including the manager saying, how am I doing at being your people leader? What else can I do to help you be successful?
Yep.
Right? Because I think in that way we get support, we feel seen and noticed. Our manager starts to know us a little bit as the human being that we are. And then we also get the feedback around, oh, do more of that and less of that
Mm.
so we can be more successful. I think that's one very important piece that we can do. I think another way we can address burnout is to invest in building the team. So we sometimes think of a team as like a bicycle wheel. We call it the wheel of team care. And
Yeah.
you have like the leader at the hub and the individual employees are the spokes. And we tend to focus a lot on the relationship between the employee and the employer or the boss, which is the spoke, which is important, as I
Mhm.
said, like to have regular meetups. But we also want to invest in the rim because without the rim, the whole thing doesn't roll. So what that means is managers paying some attention to are we making sure that we introduce new employees to the team and give the team a chance to introduce themselves to each other when they start? Are we having interactive and dynamic, authentic team meetings where people get to talk about what's hard or what they're learning or what they're noticing on their shifts? Are we encouraging the team members to form relationships like giving each other feedback about,
Mhm.
hey, it's so helpful when you resupplied, ahead of our shift. It just made everything go much easier. Because if we can invest in those relationships between the team members, it actually reduces the risk of burnout on the manager. Because we
Yeah.
get into a cycle there too. If managers burn out and then they leave, then the employees have to consistently have that revolving door with getting to know a new manager who they're training, and that
Right.
contributes to burnout too. And the last thing, and you've got it here on the slide around reengaging staff, one of our basic needs of work, there are 7 that my research has identified. We've talked about a bunch of them. Our need for human connection,
Mm.
to make our life work in terms of work-life integration and flexibility, our need to make ends meet, through cash and non-cash compensation. But one of our needs is to learn. And this at the bottom here, where you talk about reiterating career paths within a company, I think that's really important. And many employers get like a little bit lost because they say, like, well, I don't know what the career path is. And what I often say to them is, or they may be a small company, maybe I've only got 40 employees and there's not a lot of turnover. So where can you go? What I always say is it's not so much for young workers. I think about like, can I see myself here in 30 years? Young workers are going to have 15 to 20 careers in their lifetime.
Sure.
So that's not really the issue. I think it's more about my research point. So it's more about, am I growing here? Are you helping me be better tomorrow than I was yesterday?
Yeah.
Including sometimes basic things like, can you help your employees have access to some financial literacy
Mm.
tools. One of my employers has a program. They're a Mexican restaurant, and they offer free Spanish classes for their employees because they want them to be able to converse with their clientele. What can you do to help your employees grow their capacity and their capability? If somebody's working front of house in a restaurant environment, can you over time give them experience working back of house too, so they get to see the full operation? So it doesn't always have to be, oh, you'll be promoted to a supervisor. That's not always possible or
No.
even realistic. But am I capable of learning something here? Can you help me grow in my capacity to be a human who contributes to things?
Yeah.
That can really help to address burnout.
I think you touched on so many awesome things. One of the things that you touched on was the realistic aspect of not being able to constantly be promoting everybody on the frontline teams, right? And when I was, working as a lifeguard, I think I was like 16. These were long days. I was sitting around a lot. And I think what was really awesome and what my manager did was giving me small projects and small little things that she would actually do in her day to day. And looking back on it, it was very mundane for her. So it would be things like testing the chlorine levels in the pool. And she gave me that response. It was more or less, under her belt, under her responsibility. But she was like, hey, is this something that you would want to do in the future? I was like, yeah, like I would like totally. And it actually was really nice. I felt like I was a trusted employee. I felt like I had a really big role in the whole atmosphere of this place. It was really engaging, weirdly, for me. And it was such a small, I'm talking, took 3 minutes tops. And I was like, I'm like coming home. I'm like, I like tested the pool waters today. And it was a small little thing. And I think, yes, like we're talking about giving them career path ideas and really big picture items, but feeding them small little tidbits of what that day to day might look like. And I think you're attracting the right people when they're actually feeling engaged from those small little bits and pieces of offerings.
I agree 100%. And that's great that your manager did that.
Yeah.
And there's another piece that I would mention, and I know we need to take some questions and stuff too, but it has to do with, are you connecting the dots to your employees about why their job matters? Because again, I believe that work is central to our identity. We want to contribute. We all want to contribute. There's so much data and so many statistics that tell us how important work is to our identity, even if it's not paid work. I mean, Viktor Frankl's, Man's Search for Meaning, like identified that human dynamic, and it plays out, I think, all the time anyway. But what employers, I think, often fail to do is they don't spend enough time connecting the dots to their employees about, why does your job matter? And I remember, I have a short story for you. Early in my career, well, it wasn't even part of my career path necessarily, but it's one of the jobs I took that I learned some things about myself from. I was the janitor at an acute care hospital. And I took that job because it was a summer job for me, and it allowed me to live closer to my boyfriend. Good job, good reason to take a job, right?
Of course.
And it was like 7 to 2 or something. I rode my bike to work. I don't know how old I was, maybe 18, 19. But the job, when I got trained, I was listening like not very well. I just heard like, whatever. But I knew I was supposed to use these chemicals in a certain order, whatever. But I didn't pay a lot of attention. Most of us were done with our jobs by noon. My boss actually would go to the janitorial closet and smoke. You could see the smoke like coming out of his, so it wasn't like a high motivation job until something happened, which was that a patient whose room I had cleaned, she had come in for gallbladder surgery. And as I had cleaned her room a few times, I had talked to her, and she was a nice lady. She was a mom. And I heard one day I came in and my boss asked to meet with me and my colleague on the floor and said, hey, did you know Mrs. So-and-so died? She contracted an infection here at the hospital. And so I want to review with you the protocol of how we use the chemicals to clean the rooms. Because, and all of a sudden I was like, whammo, big light bulb. Like, I have the potential to make a difference between whether someone's mother or sister or friend
Yep.
comes home from the hospital. And all these years later, Meredith, I have never forgotten that. And he gave me such a gift. His name was Pedro. He gave me such a gift, which was like, what you do matters.
Oh,
I was listening. My ears were like tuned in because I liked this lady and I was really sad that she died. And I didn't think of it that way, that like my cleaning the room, because you don't see bacteria, right? But
yeah.
I remember what he taught me that day. And I've always noticed when I'm in a healthcare setting, like the housekeepers, because what they do makes such a difference. We all know now that you can really get sick being in the hospital. I didn't know it then at 18. But when I got that education, of course, it was really unfortunate that I had to have that example of somebody dying. But if he had said to me on our orientation week, hey, here's why the housekeeping job at this hospital matters so much. Here's the bacteria that can kill people. I think I would have been tuned in even earlier.
Yeah.
So we owe it to our employees to connect those dots. And if we can't connect the dots, if we don't know why their job is important, why are they doing it?
Mm. And even if the job itself is, let's say, not that fast food or anything doesn't have a place in this world, but let's say this is a fast food industry. I think instead of narrowing it as we're feeding the world or feeding America, whatever, you want to tout, you can tout it from the perspective of this is why your job is important to make sure that the entire organization runs well. You could come
Yes.
at it from that perspective. And I think that's so important to also
Well,
highlight.
Well, even yeah, you're right, because it doesn't have to be a lofty social mission. I mean,
Right.
if I'm in charge of the fryer at McDonald's, why does that job matter? Because McDonald's French fries, when they're hot, they are delicious.
Yeah.
And we want people to have a delicious, delightful experience when they eat our hot, freshly cooked French fries.
Right.
And you are
Right.
responsible for that. We don't want milk toast fries because we know what that tastes like. And so that is enough, because
Mhm.
now it becomes like, oh, I'm not only just going to slam the fryer basket. I'm gonna be like, okay, wait, I want these fries to be hot and just cooked right
Sure.
for the customer, because they taste much more delicious that way. Like even that is enough of a purpose for many. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. Or even like, here's how the fries that you're making is selling to the customer and how it's making this company money and in turn you money.
Yes.
Like
Yeah, we sell
connecting those dots.
200,000 pounds of fries every
Yes,
year, and it makes us this amount of money, which allows us to
exactly.
support a lot of families. Like that can be a good purpose too. I think you're right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
seeing those numbers sometimes can be very inspiring.
Yes, yeah, love that. Let the employees see a bit more of the back door of
Totally.
why this thing matters. I think can be so, so helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And try out some different narratives, and see kind of what your
Mhm.
employees like. I want
Yes.
to go into quickly on actionable tips and solutions. So very quickly, I want to hear about, some auditing practices on auditing your organizational environment and how HR can implement, these practices that we've talked about.
Yeah, poor HR. I don't know if we have any HR leaders, on the call, but HR has been really, really taxed and burdened with the
Yeah.
COVID-19 global pandemic, and I really have deep empathy for HR. And I feel strongly that HR needs to reinvent itself. And in particular, I think we sometimes ask of HR things that are Herculean, and that we should maybe spend more energy empowering people leaders to do some of the really strong skills that HR does. But in either case, whoever's doing the work, I think it is really important for employers, in support of, with the support of their HR team, if they have one, and their managers, to have some way to pulse check how are things going with the workforce. And that, you can do that through an audit. You can do that through a quick pulse survey, something like Culture Amp. We use the Denison Organizational Culture Survey, or even a light engagement survey, where you're trying to get a quick vibe, to how are things going here. You also can do that if you don't want to use a survey tool or a formal audit. You can do that by those two-way conversations that I mentioned, which is that I'm checking in with my employees and I have a trusting relationship that is solid enough that they're telling me the truth.
Mm,
They're telling me how they're really doing. They're not just saying everything is fine, because that way if we're auditing or pulse checking or asking about how things are going, then we can design ways to remediate the problem or support the things that are going well much more effectively. Because what we don't want to do is just splatter initiatives for reducing engagement into the organization if we don't really know what problem are we trying to fix. So
mhm.
that's where listening, I call it listening to your people, to your organization, and believing them
Yeah.
in terms of what they're saying. And a quick note on that, Meredith, is one of the nice things about a survey or a pulse check is that it does allow some anonymous feedback, but it also allows us to get a sense of the experience that people are having across different demographics, because that is helpful. Are all the Black and brown people in my organization experiencing the culture one way and all the white people are experiencing it another? Well, then there may be a challenge with how I'm building inclusion in that way. Are the young people really feeling highly burned out, but the
Yeah.
senior older people are feeling pretty secure? What's the difference there, and how can I design that? I think that that's helpful as well, because not every employee sees the organization the same way.
Mhm.
The key on any kind of assessment that I just want to make sure to say is that you have to be prepared to follow up with action.
Yeah.
If you ask people what they think or how things are going, then you want to make sure to convey back to your workforce, hey, we asked, here's some of what we learned. Here's what we're maybe going to do about it if we have some strategies, or what do you think we should do about it?
Yeah.
Like, how can we together work on this problem to make our culture better, make our environment better? Because often some of those best ideas are going to come from the front line.
Mhm.
So engaging people in solutioning, I think, is as important as asking them how things
Yeah.
are going.
Again, going back to the idea of instilling loyalty by involvement,
Yep.
huge,
Yep.
huge, and so underutilized, I think. And let alone it's typically a free resource just to have a communication or a conversation and have communication with your staff
Yep.
instead of throwing a Starbucks gift card at their face.
Yes.
I
Yes.
think that this is something that goes a little bit longer of a way and doesn't, drain you $50 every quarter to have these gift
Well,
cards.
totally. And it helps alleviate the us and them, because what we don't
Yeah.
want is, if I work for you, Meredith, and you ask me how things are going, and I'm like, well, Meredith, it's really horrible here. Like, what are you going to do about it?
Yes.
That's not that helpful, because now you just feel more burdened
Yeah.
and I feel no responsibility. What you
Mhm.
want is for me to feel responsibility and for you not to feel overburdened. So if I say, oh, things are really terrible here, Meredith, and you say, gosh, I hear you.
Mm.
That sounds really tough. I'm seeing that too. Let's talk about what we can do about it together.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
really? Okay. What do I think? I'm not sure. This sounds like a hard problem. Yeah. Now we're really in it.
Yeah. I love that. What are let's say theoretically we followed these 3 tips that we're seeing here on this slide right now. We're managing the burnout well, and we're seeing frontline employees taking this into consideration, pulling themselves out from their own burnout. And my question for you is, what are some effective ways to recognize and reward the contributions of these younger frontline staff?
Oh, I love that question. Well, the first is to notice their contributions,
Mhm.
which sounds ridiculous. I'm sure people are like, yeah, duh, of course. But I can't tell you how many organizations we work with, Meredith, who actually
Yeah.
don't notice when employees have contributions. They don't see and notice. And when I say notice, I mean notice and tell that person
Yeah.
directly what they're doing, that is helping or is positive or that you appreciate, and why. Tell them why. So it's beyond good job.
Mm.
It's like, good job with the speed with which you opened the store last week, because we had customers literally in line when the door was going to open at 8, and you were so on top of it. It just made everything go seamlessly. Be specific when you're noticing. I also think that it is helpful to have rewards and recognition that is public as well. Some people want more public, some people want less public. So kind of knowing, what do your workers want? And it could be on a case by case basis or as a team. I love team acknowledgments to build that alliance that we're in this together. I think that, like you said, gift cards and stuff, they can feel okay, but they can also feel a little bit more like a token.
Yeah.
And so I would recommend going for something that's not a gift card in that way. Like,
Mhm.
if you want to incent individual performance, maybe give someone an extra shift off,
Yeah.
or maybe give them a chance to take a class
I
that you
love
pay
that.
for, or maybe you host a team pizza party, or you take everybody to the zoo, or something like that, that is more like, hey, we really kicked it
Mhm.
this month, and we can all celebrate. I think also acknowledging publicly the specific contributions people have can make a difference in a staff meeting, a poster on the wall, like, hey, big shout out to John, who really helped make sure we didn't have any safety violations this month.
Mhm.
That can go a long way to feeling seen. A friend of mine works at a resort here locally on the grounds crew, and he's only been there like a year, and he's already been the employee of the month 3 times. And he sent a note to some of us, like a text, just saying, "Oh, here we go again." But he actually felt really, really excited about that, and he did receive a gift card for that. And but
Mhm.
because it came with the acknowledgments, and there was a little blurb in their newsletter about what he did, and then
Yeah.
he also got a gift card. It felt positive. And yeah, I love what Amber's saying, that asking your team what they like can be
Yes.
helpful, because
Yeah.
some may love gift cards or a spa appointment, or or gas money, or something like that. So
Definitely. I think Amber does have such a good point, but the crux of that is because that they like gift cards came from a or a conversation that you had with your staff, right?
yeah,
Like it all stems from, let's see what they like. And here's what I've learned from this conversation I had with them based off the feedback that they submitted for my regular, surveys that I send out, whatever it is.
yeah.
But Amber, that is a really good point. I think, reading a lot of these articles, I see a lot of people first bullet point and incentives to give their employees gift cards. And I'm starting to be
Mhm.
like, it's almost like a political cartoon. Like I imagine like a kid walking out of the door and a gift card like grabbing its leg, saying like, "Don't leave," or like a band-aid solution. Like, please, like just stay like $5 on the corner of its like little, gift
Yeah.
card.
Well, because if you remember what we need from work, we need
Yeah,
to feel connected, seen, and valued. And so does that do that? It may, but it
totally.
also may not.
Totally, totally, completely. Yes, that's such a good point. Awesome. I want to go quickly into the Q&A. I know we have a couple questions. We got some emailed in. Amanda asked a great question. Amanda asked, we've had an EAP for 2 years with very low usage. Any tips to increase participation?
Good job having an EIP.
Mhm. Yes.
Well, there is still a lot of stigma about accessing mental health resources. So, in our communities at large, not just, in the world of work, but I think one of the things I've seen work well with some clients is to really talk about the EAP in terms of what it's for, and to even begin to maybe have them come in, maybe have anyone who has used the EAP to talk about it, so that it starts to feel like, oh, this is something that is about well-being. This doesn't mean that I'm broken or wrong or bad if I go to use the EAP.
Mm.
You can also really stress the importance of confidentiality, right? That there is nobody, it's private. Nobody has to know. Right now, it's very difficult to find counselors and support for mental health because clinics are overrun with requests. So employers who have EAPs actually are providing a tremendous service to their employees, which is access to quality mental health services, which many can't find out there in the public market. So I would really try and tell those stories more publicly, demystify that the EAP is not just for people that have, it's not for people that have something wrong with them. All
Yeah.
of us benefit from well-being. And maybe even looking at that Surgeon General's report and connecting the dots between their 5 key dimensions of employee health to the things you're trying to reinforce in your workplace. And again, sort of telling the story, we want you at your best here,
Yeah.
because we know that when you are, you're going to be able to really kick it. And so we want to support you being well and upright and healthy. And here's one of the ways we do it.
Yeah. I think that's such a good point. Alice L emailed in a question. She asked, I'm the only HR in my restaurant chain. I struggle crossing the boundary of mental health. Anything to help easier address this with staff?
Yeah, it's challenging, Alice. I feel for you, because it can, as managers and as HR, it can help us feel, we can feel really uncomfortable talking about mental health. We know with like HIPAA law in healthcare, we're not at, we can't diagnose somebody. We don't want to ask somebody like, are you depressed? Those are privacy violations.
Yeah.
So in the handouts, one of the things that I put together is a list of some questions that you can ask to try to get a vibe for how somebody's feeling without putting them on the spot around a mental health reveal. You can also demystify mental health by talking about your own story. So something, for example, that I saw done in a client of mine was that they had a woman who was out on maternity leave and delayed her leave because she was suffering from some postpartum depression and had access to EAP for that. She also had disclosed that to her manager,
Oh.
and the manager was very touched by this story, but also had suffered postpartum depression and was able to say that to the employee in a confidential way. The manager was nervous and consulted HR to say, like, what can I reveal that? And the HR person said, yes, if she's shared with you that this is what she's suffering, that's a perfect place for you to have empathy. So I think as HR, I think I would recommend digging in, look at that Surgeon General's report, see if there's any tools. There's a really good tool set that's been going around on LinkedIn. And I can't even remember who is it that's sharing it, but I'll try to share it with you, Meredith, so that you can share it. And it's a mental health resource guide for small businesses. And it has a list of different ways that you can engage people around the topic of mental health without sort of outing them, that might be helpful for you, Alice, as well. There are resources to help, but also don't be afraid. If somebody says that they are struggling with anxiety or another mental health disorder, try to manage your own anxiety around that, because it's very akin to them saying, oh gosh, I've got really bad allergies, like this is a health concern.
Yeah.
So you can empathize, and that sounds really tough. How can I support you as you navigate your way through this? Just like you would if they said, I've been diagnosed with breast cancer. But I think we get a little bit more freaked out because it feels quite different, but it is all in the realm of health.
Yeah. And it's such a good point to end on. This is all very much should be treated as any other physical or even mental ailment. And yeah, it's a heavy subject, but again, empathy goes so far. Relations, storytelling, all that stuff, great communication practices for sure.
Well, and one more thing,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to addiction.
Yes.
One of the biggest places I see employers really struggle is noticing and naming addiction. It's very difficult when you have to give somebody feedback, for example, if they're overusing and it's affecting their work. But I think that model we're talking about, Meredith, can be really powerful around if someone is pursuing treatment for addiction, or if we are recommending that they pursue help with addiction. It's another illness. So sometimes what can be helpful is, like, imagine that they're talking to you about their diabetes, right? As opposed to bringing forward the shame and the blame and recrimination that we sort of historically carry in that stigma about mental health or even about burnout.
Such a good point. Such a good point. We're almost 10 minutes over time. Thank you guys so much for coming and contributing those questions. We had a couple more, and I'm so sorry we couldn't get to them today, but maybe we'll do a part 2. Mo, you were amazing. Thank you so much for, sharing some awesome information and, having this really important discussion with us, tackling something that is specific, but also very important.
Oh, it was delightful, Meredith. I love all the comments. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here and for staying. And I'd love to do it again. Super fun. The hour went way too fast.
It flies by. It always it always does. Before everyone does go, I want to share some of the handouts that we've got today. We have the 3 handouts from Mo. They're just going to be in this Google Drive folder. They're all there for you on a PDF file. Feel free to interact with those. I also quickly wanted to promote the season 2 launch of Mo's podcast, Let's Make Work Human, launching tomorrow, right? Is that correct?
Yes. It's launching tomorrow. Let's Make Work Human. We have an incredible lineup of guests. There's 4 episodes dropping tomorrow, so I'd love to have you guys tune in. Really, really great guests on the Let's Make Work Human podcast. You can find it anywhere you get your podcast, except Spotify. We're not on Spotify, but we're everywhere else: Apple, Google.
I love it. I just shared a link to that. So guys, definitely check that out. She has some amazing guests, as she had said. I was just listening to season 1 and I'm excited for season 2, to say the least.
Thank you. Thanks, Meredith.